Заседание. Времени уже у нас время заданное подходит. И, собственно, я приступлю.
I would like to start with the session. Good morning, dear colleagues and guests. Today is the 6th of July 2021, 12 o'clock Moscow time. Let me start the session of the Dissertation Committee dedicated to the defense of the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk, seeking an academic degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies in the degree field 24.00.01 Theory and History of Culture on the topic Mythological Semantics of Cyclical Dynamics of European Culture. And I would like to declare the first technical break because we have no connection with one member of the committee. The break will be about 5 minutes.
Приступаем к продолжению.
Dear colleagues, we're continuing our work. The break is over, and I'm continuing the session. So the break number 1 is over. By the act of the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University, Alexander Valentinovich Gnatov, dated the 31st of March 2021, I, Alexey Viktorovich Smirnov, a Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Cultural Studies, Philosophy of Culture and Aesthetics, St. Petersburg University, was appointed chairman of this dissertation committee. By the same act, all other members of the dissertation committee are also included in the committee. Viktor Viktorovich Muravyev, Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Cultural Studies and Pedagogical Anthropology, Syktyvkar State University. Ivan Vladimirovich Kuzin, Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Social Philosophy and Philosophy of History, St. Petersburg University. Evgeny Anatolyevich Makovetsky, Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Professor of the head of, well, can you hear and see us? Yes. The head of, Professor of the Department of Cultural Studies, Professor Philosophy of Culture and Aesthetics, St. Petersburg University. Boris Vasilievich Markov, Professor of the Department of Philosophical Anthropology, St. Petersburg. Can you hear and see us? Yes. Kirill Vladimirovich Shevchenko, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Legal Disciplines of the Russian State Social University, Minsk branch, Republic of Belarus. Can I hear? Well, I can hear you, but there's a picture on my screen that I cannot get rid of, but I can see and hear you very well. Petr Lezavyuk, Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, Czech Republic, the University of Plzeň. Can you see and hear us? Professor Lezavyuk is absent. Unfortunately, connection with him is lost. We have a quorum, so we are going to continue without him. Also with us is the candidate, Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk. Please, welcome you. I welcome you. Also, the academic advisor of the candidate, Evgeny Georgievich Sokolov, Professor of the Department of Russian Philosophy and Culture in Pittsburgh University, is here with us to improve the quality of communication. Dear ladies and gentlemen, please switch off your mobile phones, but not those who are present here, but those who are online with us, don't do that. For emergency communication, audio and visual broadcast, live broadcast is carried out on the website of St. Petersburg University, accompanied by interpretation between Russian and English. Kirill Vladimirovich, can you hear and see us? Yes, unfortunately the picture is there, but I can hear you very well. There's a technical break, number 2, 5 to 10 minutes to improve.
Хорошо, спасибо.
Thank you very much. Then the technical break is over, and we continue our session. Online with us is on the website of St. Petersburg University. You can find an email to which you can send your questions, but your questions should have relation to the presentation of the candidate and the text of the dissertation. Academic discussion they should be signed and have an affiliation of the person who asks this question. All questions, no questions that have no relation to the academic discussion or anonymous questions will be read. In accordance with the procedure of awarding academic degrees of candidate of sciences and Doctor of Sciences established in St. Petersburg University, as the session of a dissertation council is legitimate if not less than 2/3 of the established membership of the dissertation council, but not fewer than 4 people are present. Our dissertation committee consists of 7 people. 3 of the members are online, and so with all the 6 members of the Dissertation Council are present, and so with all the members of the Dissertation Committee, the communication connection is established. So I would like to go over the procedure. The agenda consists of the following items. The first one is the short presentation of the chairman about the candidate and the paperwork that has been submitted by the candidate to meet the requirements. Second, a short presentation of the candidate, about 20 minutes, covering key points of the dissertation. Third, questions to the defendant, strictly on the presentation, not more than 2 minutes per question. Fourth is answers of the candidate, addressing these questions, 5 minutes for all questions. Then 5, all members of the dissertation committee will read their reviews, including the chairman, to assess the dissertation. The 7 is answers of the candidate, covering, addressing the questions, not more than 30 minutes. Then open floor discussion, when all members, any member of the audience can ask questions or make comments, 2 minutes per speaker. All those who would like to speak up, please sign up for this opportunity in the logbook. Number 9, the chairman will read out the questions that have arrived at the by email, and I would like to remind you that lengthy questions that would take more than 2 minutes to read will not be read. Then the candidate would answer these questions, not more than 2 minutes per question. Then the academic advisor will have 3 minutes to talk about the candidate and the dissertation. Then the deliberation period, 5 minutes when the broadcast is switched off. And then open roll call voting with entering the results into the minutes. And the 14th is the decision to award or not to award the third degree to the candidate. And the 15th item is the concluding statement by the candidate. Do you have any objections? No. Then I would like to start with the first item. Again, remind you to switch off the sound on your mobiles. Who are here in this hall. On the contrary, the members of the station council who are online with us, please leave your phones on for emergency communication. First is my information about the candidate. Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk wrote his dissertation in the degree field 2400 Theory and History of Culture on the topic Mythological Semantics of Cyclical Dynamics of European Culture in St. Petersburg, in Minsk, a branch of the Russian Economic University named after Plekhanov, and it was accepted for defense on the 3rd of March 2021. The dissertation was supervised by Evgeny Georgievich Sokolov, professor at the Department of Russian Philosophy and Culture of St. Petersburg University. The number of publications includes 15 works. All 15 works are from the journals that are approved by the Ministry of Science, Russian Federation. No Web of Science or Scopus publications. The candidate has submitted to the academic sector of St. Petersburg University, Alexander Gnatov, a full package of documents in order to be to have his dissertation be accepted for defense. All the papers, all the documents comply with the requirements. Copies of these documents are available from the member of the office of the station council management who is present at this meeting. And do we have any need to go over all the documents that have been submitted by the candidate? Ivan Vladimirovich, do you have any questions? Please switch on your microphone. No questions. Please, Ivan Vladimirovich, don't switch off the camera. Well, you can switch off the microphone, but don't switch off the camera. No questions from the members of the committee, and therefore would like to give the floor to the candidate with a presentation. Not more than 20 minutes. Dear Chairman, dear members of the committee, colleagues and friends, all those who came here to support me in this very important period of my life, I would like to present to your attention a presentation on the dissertation called Semantics of Cyclical Dynamics of European Culture. One of the leading themes of cultural studies is the cyclical dynamics of culture, the study of which sheds light on paradigmatic changes in the socio-cultural space and their specificity in the structures of cultural and civilizational experience, of the past and present. There are two dynamics. One of them is cyclical dynamic, linear and cyclical dynamics. And despite a large stratum of works devoted to the dynamics of culture, they did not fully reflect the universality and at the same time the independence of the dynamics of culture, based on a system of mythological representations of a cyclical type in the context of the diversity of approaches, concepts and opinions in relation to the disclosure of the cyclical dialects of European culture recorded in the framework of humanitarian knowledge. The cultural analysis of its mythological and semantic foundations is still relevant. The purpose and objectives of the study in the dissertation, I turn to the study of nature and the ways of functioning of the mythological semantic foundations of the cyclical dynamics of European culture within the framework of cultural studies and related branches of scientific knowledge. A number of interrelated tasks arise from the purpose of the study. First, revealing the genesis of the mythological semantic foundations of the cyclical dynamics of European culture, determination of the place of the semantics of the beginning or the origin in the system of mythological representations of the cyclical type, research of the methodological complex in the context of the reactualization of the archetypal layer of culture, clarification of the phenomenon of eternal return and the inversion of eternity and return, revealing of the mythological semantics of the rational and the irrational and the inversion dynamics of art, consideration of the mythological semantics of the binary code of cyclicity in European folk culture, correlation of the principles of cyclicity and linearity in pagan mythological systems and Christian religions, explication of the process of correlation between profane and sacred sections of mythological historicism, and 9, substantiation of the reconstructive nature of cyclical development and the implementation of the socio-cultural ideal. For the purpose of the problem topic analysis of texts, as well as the development of the concept of the dissertation research, the author used a number of theoretical and special methods, theoretical research methods, typological, dialectical, structural and functional, theoretical reconstruction, hermeneutic, comparative analysis, theoretical modeling, special methods of myth research, semiotic method, structural and typological. For the purpose of the problem thematic analysis of text, as well as the development of theoretical and special methods that make it possible to present various fragments of the development of culture in a systemic integral unity. The author used, therefore, a systemic approach. The scientific novelty of the research lies in the study of the mythological semantics of the cyclical dynamics of European culture, due to which the phenomenon of cyclicity is presented in a wide historical and cultural context, including its stable forms of expression, as well as specific variations and modifications. The novelty of the scientific results lies in the fact that for the first time in the dissertation, in the session, the author explored the cyclical dynamics of European culture as a stable structural and semantic formation, including multi-layered topological levels of cyclicity of universal, local and regional types, showed that that the cyclical dynamics of European culture retains unchanged mythological and semantic foundations due to its determination by the archetypes of the archaic layer of culture, proved that cyclical dynamics have specific mechanisms for translating attitudes of the mytho-religious type to the state of modern culture, explored the phenomenon of eternal return as sacred and profane modes of cyclicity objectified in the cyclical realities of culture conditioned by the category of eternity. The features of cyclical dynamics in the system of folkloric dual representations which have found expression in the timeless concept of the eternity of man on earth, his ancestral and cultural constancy have been revealed, substantiated the constructive nature of nonlinear development in the context of the opposition of repetition and progress as elements of the cyclical and linear dynamics of European culture. The mechanism of correlation between the principles of cyclicity and linearity was revealed on the basis of the analysis of mythological semantics of the real and ideal. The analysis of the connection between myth, religion, philosophy, and science was carried out, which allowed us to go beyond the Enlightenment and positive stereotypes of thinking and ideas about civilization development. While writing the dissertation, while remaining cultural-logical, assumed an in-depth analysis of myth. I assumed an in-depth analysis of myth, philosophy, theology, art, history, folklore, which in general made it possible to present the cyclical dynamics of European culture in a new perspective in various forms of cultural experience. The dissertation research consists of an introduction, a general description of the work, a main part, which includes 4 chapters, and conclusion, and a bibliographic list of 396 positions. In the first chapter, Genesis of the mythological semantic foundations of culture, the definition of the cyclical dynamics of culture is given, as well as its mythological semantic foundations are revealed as a result of the reflection of natural process. It is argued that the mythological semantic foundations act as a source of the cyclical dynamics of culture and, for the most part, determine the trajectory of its development. In the second chapter, The Cyclic Nature of Myth, the author turns to the mythology of the beginning, which is revealed in various kinds of ideas, archetypes, patterns, worldviews actualized at various stages of cultural evolution. In the third chapter, Inversion Model of Dynamics, on the example of individual phenomena and forms of culture, eternal return, arc, folklore, reveals the nature of the inversion dynamics of culture. In the fourth chapter, Mythosemantic Patterns of Nonlinear Dynamics, it is indicated that the formation of the cyclical dynamics of European culture occurs in relation to the concept of linearity. In turn, the opposition of repetition and progress is removed within the framework of cyclical development, which opens up the prospect of the implementation of cyclical dynamics and its mythological and semantic foundations in the modern socio-cultural space. The presented dissertation is the result of many years of work on the study of the mythological semantic foundations of the cyclical dynamics of European culture, during which a cultural analysis of the presented scientific progress was carried out. This was confirmed in the following results. The genesis and transformation of the mytho-naturalistic foundations of cyclical dynamics as a reflection of cyclical processes in the natural environment recorded in the and mythological semantic landmarks of European culture at the early stages of its development have been revealed. The place of the beginning of phenomenon in cosmogonic mythology was determined, as well as the features of its differentiations in the mythological semantic representations of the cyclical type. The mythological complex was investigated in the context of the reactualization of the sacred sphere of European culture, as well as its secularized chronostructures. Revealed the determinant of eternal return and the inversion of eternity and return, which determined the permanent reproduction of cultural phenomena in their uniformity and constancy, the specificity of the dialectic of the rational and the irrational in art, in the context of the inversion dynamics of European culture has been determined, explored the mythological semantics of the binary code of European folklore, which made it possible to connect the system of binary oppositions with cyclic processes in nature and determine their space in the national calendar. The principles of cyclicity and linearity in the Christian tradition are correlated from the point of view of annihilation of the pagan doctrine of the plurality of cycles. The process of correlation of the sacred and profane sections of the life of European culture in the context of mythological historicism, which contains cyclical and linear variations of historical thinking, has been explicated, and finally substantiated the constructive nature of cyclical development in eliminating the opposition of repetition and progress and the implementation of socio-cultural ideas. Provisions for the genesis of the mythological semantic foundations of cyclical dynamics is due to the specificity of pre-reflexive syncretic consciousness, which is genetically dependent on the cyclicalization of natural phenomena, vegetation, metamorphosis, regeneration, etc. Second, the phenomena of the beginning is present in the sacred and profane dimensions of culture. In the sacred dimension of culture possessing a supernatural nature, it is endowed with a timeless meaning, due to which it demonstrates a self-reproducing universal nature that eliminates possible contradictions in a single whole. The mythological complex is determined by the idea of a sacred beginning containing mythological semantic landmarks fixed in their immutability and predictability, due to which it represents a model of cyclicity built on the principle profane, sacred, profane. Eternal return is a mode of inversion determined by the interaction of the phenomena of eternity and return. The phenomenon of eternity, which has a mythological and semantic nature, induces the phenomena of culture to a permanent return. At the same time, they retain the same type of constancy in the space-time continuum. 8. The mythological semantics of cyclical dynamics in the diachrony of European culture, number 5, reveals itself in mythological historicism, which preserves archaic ideas about the cycle and the generic memory. The binary oppositions form cyclical cyclicity. In Christian eschatology is produced eternity, life eternity. As I said, the mythological semantics of cyclical dynamics in the diachronic of European culture reveals itself in mythological historicism, which preserves archaic ideas about cycle and the genetic memory. And 9, the constructive nature of cyclical development is fixed in the elimination of the opposition of repetition and progress due to their synthesis in the modern socio-cultural space. Thank you for your attention. I would like to ask members of the Dissertation Committee, do you have any questions to the defendant strictly on the presentation that covers the key issues of the dissertation? Do we have any questions? Yeah, I have a question. Professor Viktor Viktorovich Muravyev. Pavel Grigorievich, how do you align the concepts sacred, sacral, sacred and holy and sort of supernatural? In my dissertation, they are used all throughout the work. They are very synonymous. Supernatural, for example, super sensitive, supersensual. This is something that is beyond physical perception. And myth, in the ontology of myth, supernatural can be represented by God's lair, of demons and angels. Well, demon is unrecognized God, and there's also the hero on the activity that has both godly and human nature. Lossev philosophy, you pointed out that there's no much difference between the natural and supernatural layers of being, and in literature, in literary myth creation, Gogol expressed this idea, like for example V with which is well, I'm going to recount the storyline. As far as the sacred, as far as holy, we'll start with holy. Has to do with the cult, with worshipping of a deity. It's connected with mythological ritual. If we look at sacred, how it's connected with myth, this is something significant. For example, sacred oath, for example, of a soldier. And the last thing is the sacred, the phenomenon of notion of sacred. And I didn't, unfortunately, present any definition of this. The notion of sacred has a wide field of meanings. It can be as multifaceted, both supernatural and of God, for example, holy, and sacred. We understand everything that goes beyond reality, everyday reality. This is this is how I delineate this concept. Thank you very much. Thank you very good. Victor Victorovich, are you happy with the answer? Yes, I am. Do we have any other questions? Yes, I have one question too. Kirill Vladimir Shevchenko, please. Dear Pavel Grigorievich, have this question. Can mythological historicism be presented as cultural reality? And if so, what is your take on this? Well, this is a question from a historian, Doctor of Historical Sciences. The theme of history as a science that includes some events, empirical science, it can include myth as well. In mythological historicism, there's a meeting of myth and history, and that happens at the very early stages of historiography. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that myth that enters history has already been transformed, and the logos in history, in historical tradition, it stops being authentic, and there's a mythological gnoseology goes to the background. Then again, this goes beyond some empirical sequence of historical events. There's a different reality that is formed in the process of interaction of history and myth. Thank you. Any other questions, dear colleagues? No more questions on the presentation, and like to turn to the next item, reviews of the dissertation. I will start with some external reviews. There have been 5 external reviews. The first is from Ivanov Oleg Evgenich, Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Vice Rector of the Institute of Theology, St. Petersburg. As a positive review, as dissertation, he mentions that mythological study of myth is shown to be as important as the study of politics and social processes, and this is important to see that this is related to Russia. Cyclicism Cyclicism restrains progress. This is not necessarily a bad influence. There are no questions in the review, no references to drawbacks, but the conclusion is that the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk on the topic semantics of the cyclical dynamics of European culture complies with the main requirements of the procedure of St. Petersburg University on awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences. The review is signed and it's endorsed by the seal. The second review by Ivchenko from Professor Ivchenko from Minsk, Belarusian State University, head of the Department of Media Linguistics and Editing. This is a long review. It says that the conclusions are important regarding, for example, the eternal return. All the goals set in this dissertation have been achieved. The empirical base is valid for a very good analysis of mythological and ritual complex of the archetypal layer of culture, and semiotic method reveals the semantics of myth and the how was perceived by archaic people. This the author operates terminology in a skillful way. The scientific relevance of the work is that it ties European cultural studies and Russian treatments of it, and the resume is that the dissertation complies with the key requirements of the procedure of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. The plagiarism clause has not been the plagiarism clause has been met too. So it's signed and also the signature verified by the HR. The next is by Anna Priyenko, Doctor of Philosophical Sciences of the National Academy of Sciences of Belarus. This is a joint review also by Nikonovich, candidate of Philosophical Sciences, Senior Research Fellow of the Institute of Philosophy, National Academy of Sciences of Belarus. Again, a positive review and it says that the author points out the cyclicity of natural process as the basis of myth creation. The author of this analyzes the phenomenon of mythological repetition or cyclicity, aligning as to bisynos with characteristic mimicry. Looking at calendar myths, Pavel Grigorievich concludes that there's an identity of microcosm and macrocosm. Therefore, the dissertation at a very high level presents an analysis of myth in the cultural space. And the dissertation shows that this research is an independent work, is a rounded work, and Pavel Grigorievich presents a theory of cyclical dynamic in the theory of culture, and the resume is that the dissertation fully complies with the procedure of St. Petersburg University, and Martysyuk. Pavel Grigorievich deserves the third degree to be awarded to him. The next review is by Sopronov Petr Alexandrovich, professor, rector of St. Petersburg Institute of Theology and Philosophy. Again, the review is positive. No critical remarks or questions. And the work that we examine here is of a creative nature and reveals the topic that is presented in the title of this station. The work has both theoretical and practical importance, and therefore the resume is the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich, complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg University, included in the procedure of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Science, and therefore Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich deserves the academic degree of Doctor of Philosophical Science to be awarded to him. This the signature of the author of the review is verified by the HR of the institution, and then the next review is by Professor Skramtsov, again the head of professor of the Department of Management Social Work, the Russian State Social University, Minsk branch, Flura Ibragimov, by Flura Ibragimovna Khramtsova. It says, again, it's a positive review. The results are of theoretical significance. The author presents new approaches to the study of myth in main European cultural paradigms. And the resume is that the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk meets the main requirements of the procedure of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Science and Doctor of Science at St. Petersburg University, and Martysyuk, Pavel Grigorievich deserves the third degree. Therefore, all the external reviews have been read. As I said, there are no questions or critical remarks or recommendations. Therefore, we can proceed to the next item on the agenda, as the reviews or statements by the members of the committee with their reviews, their assessment. Since all the reviews have been published on the website, maybe you could only focus on the crucial points in your reviews, critical remarks, questions, and recommendations. Therefore, I'd like to go over to the Shevchenko Kirill Vladimirovich for key moments. The work of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk that is dedicated to the mythological semantics of the cyclical dynamics of European culture is a novel and interdisciplinary work. The relevance of the work is obvious because this phenomenon is understudied in Russian cultural studies. This work will give an impetus to the development of such studies, not only in cultural studies but in philosophy at large. The scientific novelty lies in the fact that there's a very wide scope of study, and this includes a very thorough review of very many approaches to the study of the subject matter, and it's important that for future interdisciplinary research that this work has it has a multi-layer study of myth. I would like to point out to the high scientific level of the work, because he used a lot of methods, modern methods, that has to do with this study, not only with the cyclicity of culture, but other social cultural processes. The dissertation study will contribute to the successful formation of integrated humanitarian knowledge, and the further development of the study of myth, like for example of reproduction of myth in the public consciousness and contemporary culture. This, for example, this is very relevant because today political myth creation is an ongoing trend, and it's very important that the results of the dissertation are of a practical nature, and they're very valuable, and they can be used for the substantiation of the concept of cyclical dynamics as a as an attempt of resolving contradictions in the European country in the context of a holistic and interdependent world, and also renovation of traditions of European culture, of research programs and positive theoretical practical models. Therefore, I endorse the dissertation and consider Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich worthy of the third degree. Thank you. Dear Pavel Grigorievich, would you like to answer the questions? I would like to answer all the questions as a whole. Yes, please write them down. I would like to read out the review of Petr Lizavyuk, the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk on the topic mythological semantics of the cyclical dynamics of the European culture is an important phenomenon in the cultural civilization and process. Cyclical dynamics is a very important phenomenon in the cultural civilization and process that demands very good and thorough research. This research of presented in the work of semantics of the cyclical dynamics allows to thematize and legalize different directions of cultural civilizational process, at the basis of which there's a need to preserve the basis values of European culture and their stable landmarks at the background of very volatile social cultural situation. As of special interest is the ethnic culture of Eastern Slavs. The endorsement is in the review. The dissertation is an original comprehensive study, and it complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg University. There are no critical remarks or questions in this review. Now I'd like to give the floor to Ivan Vladimirovich Kuzin. Dear colleagues, I am very critical of the work. Therefore, I would like to point out only one most important issue or positive point which makes the work worthy of the degree, and then after that I will enumerate my drawbacks. My comments as to the drawbacks. First of all, the main strength of the work is that it presents cyclicity as a constant denominator that can be used to study culture. This is a method of of revealing the diversity of images, cultural images. This is a very interesting idea that I took away from the work. However, all the other things bewilder me. One of the questions I would like to direct at the candidate. You are a doctor of philosophical sciences, and when I read the text, what motivated you to write this dissertation, to receive a degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies, as a pragmatic considerations of theoretical consideration, the ideas, what ideas made you want to become a Doctor of Cultural Studies? And then conceptual questions. From a formal point of view, what I saw, the work that it has some hot air, so to speak. There are many definitions of myth and ritual for several characteristics for over several pages. This is a textbook approach and redundant, and sometimes you repeat yourself on page 47. Some words completely is completely repeated on page 53. Page 48 is repeated on page 51. There are some mistakes. The carelessness that you could have avoided. Some careless work carelessness is reflected in the logic of narration. On pages 84 and 84, there's a concept about the unity. Before, on page 84 and 85, there's a quote. There's a Plotin's concept of the unity. So how is this concept of Plotin related to for example, when together with the description of the beginning as a chthonic deity that fills the universe in cosmogonic myths, European nations, there's a dualistic view of the creation and the subsequent design of the world. Can we understand it that in Plotin we have to do with the description of chthonic deity of filler? If in the research there's also some unexplainable passages in the work. On page 57 it says a metamorphosis is resurrected as carrier of some strange transfigurations, and it is a reminiscence of a seminal idea of anthropocentrism, and potentially it contains the integral, the wholeness inherent in it of the expression of human nature. I don't understand what the author meant. The work is not read through, and there are some mishaps and confusing passages. However, with the multitude of drawbacks, the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk on the topic of mythological semantics of the cyclical dynamics of European culture complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg University of the procedure that is included in the procedure of awarding academic degrees. Again, I return to what I said before about the main strength. Therefore, I would like to state that Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk deserves the awarding of the sought academic degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies. Thank you very much, Ivan Vladimirovich. The next is Professor Makovetsky. Thank you very much, Alexei Viktorovich. I will only focus on the drawbacks. Sometimes when you read a dissertation, you have an impression of inaccuracies and carelessness. Page 80, pages 197, 198. Second, in my view, the dissertation has too many formulations of the provisions that are defended. And for example, I don't like the statements, the provisions number 2 and 3. You could have united them. Number 3, the dissertation is characterized by high-level theoretical reflection. This is a plus, but as a consequence, there's lack of empirical material. There's a lack of detail and examples. The empirical base that, although it's a theoretical work, is important, and there's an example of it on pages 197 and 198. But as a whole, the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk on the topic Mythosemantics of Cyclical Dynamics of European Culture complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg University on awarding academic degrees, and Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk deserves to be awarded the academic degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies. Thank you very much, Evgeny Anatolyevich. And now the Professor Markov, please, your turn. I will not dwell on the whole review. It's quite long. Because a lot of my colleagues have said about the positive sides, about scientific novelty. In the period that we're living through, it's very good that we turn to the life of traditional cultures, and we return to it to look at it, and in order to survive this life hurdles, and whether we should learn from our predecessors. The theoretical significance lies in the fact that there's a difficulty reconstructing the experience of your own or an alien by representatives of different cultures. Well, the novelty of the approach is in the development of the conceptual apparatus of semantics and the use of such concepts as eternal return, repetition, rhythm, inversion, cyclical development, etc., to describe the basic values of culture that were formed in the past and are recurrent in the process of historical development. There's a very interesting study of the body practices, and I would like to. There's a protest against revolutionarism. They say that evolution is like an arrow in Europe, and the East is cyclical, a constant return, some kind of hibernation. And we can see that that Eastern nations have woken up, and Europe is in crisis. On the contrary, and the author says that in traditional cultures of Europe, there's a cyclicity, and I think it's very interesting that European culture is not only linear. I will not talk about the tasks and objectives. I will just talk about my criticisms. For example, I wouldn't say that Nietzsche created the theory of return. I wrote a book about it. Nietzsche actually was ironic about this eternal return. Some situation. Well, Nietzsche doesn't have that. Doesn't have a full theory. Well, maybe you should look at Deleuze or the model of repetition from Kierkegaard. and then there's Political Philosophy of Kant. There's a very good analytical preface and the American edition of it. As far as the dynamics, well, you should have referred to Jaspers and the passionality of Gumilev, or a heretic essay by Patočka. As far as the protest against evolutionists, we talked about sacred. There's a problem here because there isn't enough apparatus. Maybe you should have looked more thoroughly at Rudolf Otto's book, and because there's a very good theory by philosophical anthropology, and of course there's also Brazilian anthropologists, Kohn and Castro. From the talking to my colleague Cousin, you could have looked at some findings of neurosciences. There's a natural environment, and the mentality of ethnos is from the interaction of man with nature as we see it. But neural networks are built even before phenomenality, as Chernigovskaya says. That the brain is on its own. So the natural from there could have been a transition from the natural to the cultural. So there's some elements of art. For example, the picture, the death of Icarus, is a realistic style, and of course this depicts mythological creatures, but the main thing in this picture is the condemnation of secularization. Icarus falls, and a man who is dressed not in rags but well dressed is plowing the earth, and is not even aware, doesn't even notice the death of Icarus. The same about the Divine Comedy on page 56. You should have pointed out the repetition of the myth in art, but also not only the repetition of the myth in art, but also its deformation. For example, the pictures of hell, and especially the interim between hell and paradise in Dante reflect the structure of relationships between Italian cities at the time, so this interim is a Catholic innovation of a begging system. And the main thing that needs to be corrected as references because a lot of researchers don't know of each other's works. Then there are some conferences that feature speakers that talk about the same thing, but are not aware of each other's research. So you have to look more closely at similar studies. And on the whole, the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk on the top mythosemantics of cyclical dynamics of European culture complies with the main requirements of the procedure of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the candidate Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk deserves the third degree of Doctor of Philosophical Sciences. Muravyov Viktor Viktorovich, your turn. Dear colleagues, the dissertation studies approaches to the study of the emergence and the development of European culture and its interaction with nature, man, and society. The author of the work reveals the genetic connection of this development with the concepts, with the content of archetypal mythological symbols, and it says shows that such determination defines the cyclical character of historical dynamics of European cultures. Cyclicity is defined by the author as a repetition or repeatability, and he's right to show that the return in culture exists as a reproduction of the structure of a concrete cycle in history, the phenomenon of multiple cycles, and as a single straightened cycle. For example, we know that the first Christian communities were based on the communist ideas of communal property, and as the main conclusion is that dissertation of Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich fully complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg University, and Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk deserves the right to be awarded a Doctor of Cultural Studies degree. I will read some fragments from my review. The main goal is formulated in a valid way, and the formulation of the hypothesis is quite original, and it talks about the constants of cyclicity of culture in Europe. All the the provisions for defense relate to the goal, and they're not uncontroversial. I would like to point to the following drawbacks. First of all, the main object of the study, the cyclical dynamics of culture, appears postulated by the author on the basis of an analysis of secondary academic sources, which makes its theoretical construct and is hardly verifiable. And the foundation, the concept of the author, it consists in the works of the classics of the theory of culture and the theory of myth, which the works of whom were published at the beginning or the middle of the 20th century, and therefore there is no review of the contemporary state of the problem in the introduction. Nevertheless, the dissertation of Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg University that relate to the procedure of awarding academic degrees, and it corresponds to the passport of the degree field 24.00.01, Theory and History of Culture. These are all the reviews by members, both external and internal, and now we can turn to the candidate's answers, but I would like to address members of the station. Do we need another technical break? I'm ready to. Are you ready to continue? Therefore, I have a question that has to do with. Can I not leave the camera? I cannot switch off the camera. Therefore, I would like to have a technical break. Ivan Vladimirovich, how much time do you need? 3 minutes. 5 minutes then. Technical break number 3 is announced approximately for 5 minutes, and then we will continue. Technical break number 3, 5 minutes.
Так, тогда я объявляю.
Now I would like to announce that the technical break is over. Now I would like to turn to the next item on the agenda. These are answers of the candidates to the questions that were included in the reviews. Dear Alexander Borisovich, Ivan Vladimirovich, Evgeny Anatolyevich, Viktor Viktorovich, and Kirill Vladimirovich. When I looked at your reviews that included recommendations, critical remarks, I felt the profound nature of nature of your comments, and that testifies to the close reading of my dissertation. I would like to answer some questions. As far as the motivation that made me work on this dissertation and attempt of Doctor of Cultural Studies degree. My formation was in the Belarusian educational environment, and when we discussed myth, I argued with some members of the Academy of Sciences who were standing on positivist foundations and looked at myth as a false concept, and I advocated myth as an idea, and therefore I wanted to move this work further and make a step. Boris Vasilyevich puts very interesting questions with very valuable recommendations. First one is the sacral aspect, the sacred aspect of philosophy of history, and what can be done not to turn it into a historiosophy. I would like to respond in this way as one of the directions of the effective implementation of the sacred aspect in the philosophy of history. This is the subject connection of the philosophy of history itself with religious studies, sociology, and applied cultural studies. The philosophy of history is in need of sociological and applied cultural methodology as an empirical building material, since it delivers concrete facts and results. Based on them, the philosophy of history makes universal generalizations and conclusions regarding the entire historical process, which are by no means speculative, but represent deeply thought out scientific knowledge, which reveals the mechanism of introducing a person to culture, as well as technologies for managing sociocultural processes and their forecasting. Therefore, this ideal considerations enter reality. The recommendation to match the author's concept with structural, mythological, semiological, synergetic models, the problem of linear and cyclical development associated with other differences in cultural studies. Well, of course, structural, morphological, semiological, and synergetic models under certain conditions can be used to develop a theoretical model of the cyclical dynamics of European culture, although they need a preliminary thorough analysis. This also applies to the studies of Jaspers, Gumilov, and Pyatychka. One of the possible directions for the implementation of the ideas of the above thinkers is their assessment from the standpoint of revealing in their content the elements of the sacred that determine the course of historical development, although other research vectors may also be present. And as far as the but as far as Nietzsche, eternal return remains a problem, a kind of mystery. Well, my answer is this. Until recently, the phenomenon of eternal return was usually associated with the philosophical instructions of Nietzsche, and accordingly was interpreted in this context. And so, but in the context of mythological historicism, history is viewed as an organism, not as a mechanism, since mythological epistemology does not admit the very fact of the existence of inanimate nature. So, if we turn to cultural studies models of Spenger, for example, culture is animate, has a soul, and then it becomes civilization. A civilization returns to life again. And now talking to the eternal return. This is a metaphor, Professor Markov says, not a concept and theory. It is advisable to check the author's concept of eternal return with the methods of Deleuze and Kierkegaard. Well, until recently, the phenomenon of eternal return was usually associated with the philosophical constructions of Nietzsche, and accordingly was interpreted in this context. For example, Deleuze considered this phenomenon as a repetition that has a source of difference. For example, there's some very early texts like the Iliad that deal with return, and Deleuze saw in the eternal return something new, which is realized with insufficient completeness of empirical being, or with its excess. Well, at the same time, Nietzsche's merit is that using traditional ancient myths and the teachings of natural philosophers, he managed to create his own doctrine of eternal return. At the same time, he managed to show the heterogeneity of the nature of eternal return, its positive and destructive orientation. One can agree that Nietzsche's eternal return remains a problem, a kind of mystery, yeah. At the same time, in the dissertation, the phenomenon of eternal return was presented as a mythological semantic basis of the cyclical dynamics of culture, the structure-forming components of which were the concepts of eternity and return. As for the comparative analysis of the author's concept of eternal recurrence with the theoretical model of Kierkegaard's repetition, in the near future the corresponding work will be done in this direction. Now look how you can take account of this Yes, again, Boris Vasilievich question. Now there's a tendency to make the dominant cultures acquire power to destroy monuments, to declare their creators imperialists. But how can the process of reactualization of elements of pagan culture proceed in practice? I see that the process of reactualization of elements of pagan culture can be carried out in a number of directions. One of them is being implemented within the framework of state policy, referred to as spiritual revival. For example, in Belarus, they do that. Spiritual revival is as a focus for the state. Metropolitan Pavel said of Metropolitan of Minsk. He said that the program of spiritual revival is the revival of pagan heritage, and we have to stay away from it. I think we shouldn't stay away from it because pagan heritage is the process of mythologization as a process of aesthetization, really. Within the framework of spiritual revival, field research of original type is carried out, aimed at finding and studying elements of authentic folklore. Another direction is associated with political myth-making. It uses mechanism technologies aimed at updating the irrational structures of thinking, taking into account the political and cultural characteristics of the population. Next question is by Ivan Vladimirovich. Very complicated questions. On page 81, the true meaning of the position is that any desire to overcome the closedness of the space of the myth turns into a return to the original position. For this reason, the growth of individual forms of existence far from the true beginning. To appears to be foggy. Well, and how does it combine the author's basic idea of classical dynamics as the foundation of cultural development? Well, my answer is this. Cyclical dynamics includes both a moment of development and a change that expresses the state and the originality of both a single cultural phenomenon and the cultural historical type as a whole. One of the mythological and semantic foundations of cyclic dynamics is metamorphosis. Directly related to the primitiveness, metamorphosis is a product of the syncretism of mythological thinking, which presupposes the unity and mutual transition of heterogeneous life forms, universal shape-shifting. Within the framework of primitive culture, universal modifications are presented by mythological metaphors as containing a single cycle, life, death, life, tricksterism, reincarnation, and also regeneration, restoration. Being an element of a closed mythological space-time, it excludes the prospect of transcending what exists outside the mythological space. At the same time, it gives mobility to the mythological picture of the world. If at the early stages of the formation of culture, metamorphosis is characterized by cyclical changes of an external, mostly universal nature, then in the context of the dynamics of culture, metamorphosis along with external changes acquires other meanings of an anthropological, moral, and a religious type. Within the framework of the dynamics of culture, metamorphosis can be of interest from the standpoint of ontology as a circulating phenomenon, functionality, ritual and ceremonial practices, as well as possible transformation in the context of successive cultural paradigms. Also, Ivan Vladimirovich says points out that on page 70, I say, in the natural environment, cyclicity dominates, which is due to the reproduction of biological forms represented in the immutability and constancy. How will the theory of evolution fit into this? And the answer is that cyclical process and the natural environment are of interest from the standpoint of their perception by mythological consciousness. The myth is a kind of reflection of natural process of a cyclical type, largely due to myth ritualism. Cyclical processes in nature are endowed with a stable, unchanging, predictable nature. Myth is this is predictable. In the Belarusian folklore, Hokani of spring is a request for spring to come. In folkloric consciousness, there's no such diversity of spring of last year, next year, this year. This is one unit, spring. It comes when it should. So this is a stable phenomenon. Evgeny Anatolievich Makovetsky makes a very interesting comment that the work explores mythological semantics of the cyclical dynamics of European culture, but is not explained, and especially from the point of view of the geographical and chronological framework of this European culture. There's a lack of chronological certainty, and Alexei Viktorovich also makes the same remark, that the dissertation lacks a clear definition of the temporal and spatial boundaries of European culture. And of course, if I said that I look at prehistoric periods of 40,000 years ago, and early forms of religion were formed there, and when you talk about Europe, it's about the archaics of Greece. Maybe it would have been strengthened of my work, but I will try to answer this question. Currently, there are a significant number of different approaches and points of view that make it difficult to develop a comprehensive concept of European culture. Like any other concept, European culture, when trying to introduce it into reality, is not able to acquire clear temporal and spatial boundaries. In this regard, the theoretical model of the cyclical dynamics of European culture proposed by the author is mostly built on key cultural historical paradigms, which in their totality form its general cultural basis. Even in antiquity, stable foundations of this dynamics of culture were formed, built on the basis of a system of mypo-religious ideas. At the same time, they retain an enviable stability and the ability to actualize in the richer and more diverse way in the functional dimension of modern cultural constructs. For this reason, I did not specifically dwell on the modern numerous manifestations of cyclical dynamics, so as not to plunge into the infinity of research. And another question from Evgeny Anatolievich, pages 197, 197, ends with the quotations from Saint Athanasius the Great and Saint Augustine, and who are representatives of the next era of Christian thought. Introducing Saint Athanasius the Great and Saint Augustine as apologists, I did not mean that the latter belonged to a specific stage in the development of Christian teaching that preceded patristics, i.e. apologetics, but the critical attitude of representatives of Christian thought to the pagan idea of the cycle, because they knew about the difference between the Greek ideas of the cycle and Christianity. To them, only linear time can take a man to eternity. So the early church fathers were well aware, again, with the discrepancy between the cyclical time of the Greeks and the linear time of the Bible and Christianity. And in their opinion, only linear lasting time can lead to a person to eternity. Obviously, relying on the linear time, it becomes possible, potential liberation from the burdens of worldly life, with its subsequent replacement with eternal life. The final awakening of spirit takes place with the final dormition of matter. Cyclicity, presented as periodic repetition, deprives a person of eternity, and hence the truth. In our opinion, each sentence of this paragraph needs clarification. Well, I would say that the linear time is present in Christian eschatology. According to Christian teaching, it exhausts itself as eternity. Cyclicity is not able to overcome the temporal dimension that therefore prevents the onset of eternity. Truth in Christian teaching is realized in a divine plan. As to the main object of research, the cyclical dynamics of culture is postulated on the basis of secondary scientific sources. Well, the work is done on the theory of culture. Unlike works on applied cultural studies, it is a theoretical study based on numerous authoritative scientific sources, acting as a kind of guarantor of the objectivity of the author's scientific research. The scientific theories and concepts presented in the work allowed the author to develop a theoretical construct of the cyclical dynamics of European culture, built on the basis of mythological semantic concepts. the same time giving preference to theoretical cultural-logical sources. Research of this kind should not underestimate the possibilities of actual material. In this regard, the work used ethnographic materials containing empirical information about primitive cultures, as well as works on modern folklore, addressing the identification of elements of the pagan mythological heritage and various manifestations of modern realistic worldview. Folklore study, and it has empirical material. Margaret Brown, Strauss, and Mitten, and I used their ethnographic field material. As far as the question, again by Alexander Viktorovich, as to the theoretical basis of the author concept was formed by the works of the classical theory of culture, theory of myth, relating mainly to the beginning and the middle of the 20th century. Well, currently in modern cultural studies, there are no concepts of the cyclical dynamics of European culture built on the basis of the semantics of mythological, religious, and metaphysical views. For this reason, I turn to the classics of the theory of culture and the theory of myth, relating mainly to the beginning, traced mainly to the beginning of, in the middle of the 20th century. Nevertheless, these ideas, their ideas are in line with mine. Nevertheless, in certain areas of culture, there are still modern studies that are consonant with my concepts. In this regard, the works of Russian and foreign scientists of certain interest, Krivtsun, Hansen, Löwe, Krenova, Pigolova, Poloshina, Sopranova, and Svilo, and others. Among the submitted reviews, there are also requests for clarification regarding the frame for the emergence of individual ideas. For example, in parallel with the author's assertion that the origins of the communist idea are hidden in the teachings of the medieval theologian Joachim Florsky, Victor rightly points to the earlier origins of the communist idea, which are present in the text of the New Testament. In the Acts of the Apostles, it is indicated that the first Christian communities were organized according to the communist principles of property equality, and no one from his estate called his own, but they had everything in common. Acts 4:32. I agree with the rest of the comments and the recommendations. Some of them need understanding, and for example, the ideas of Florsky, the impact of the Holy Spirit, and Viktor Viktorovich referred to the text, and some of the comments and recommendations need a thorough theoretical study, and will be taken into account when writing scientific papers on this issue. These recommendations help me to look at this problem from a different perspective, and as some of my ideas will be reworked, and I hope to incorporate these comments into my future work. Thank you very much, Pavel Grigorievich. Dear colleagues, are you all happy with the answers? Yes, happy. The same with me. Same here. So, do we have anyone here who would like to speak up? No takers, and therefore we can read questions that have been sent. No questions have arrived. Therefore, I would like to give the floor to Evgeny Georgievich Sokolov with a statement about the candidate and his work. This is just a short. I am entitled to characterize the candidate, not the work. We've known each other for a long time. He approached me a long time ago. Pavel Grigorievich's background is philosophy. Usually people go from cultural studies to philosophy because this is a private science vis-a-vis philosophy is a general science. And for example, Pavel Grigorievich didn't rest on his laurels as a doctor of philosophy, and he is intellectually searching person, and well, conferences and papers are one thing, but a dissertation that will be scrutinized by your peers is something else. And there are some drawbacks, of course, that are this bad, but I'm a graduate of the Faculty of Philosophy, because cultural studies is also a theoretical science and also not only an applied science. I think the work is successful, and I endorse the candidacy of the author of the dissertation. Thank you very much, Evgeny Georgievich. Do we have anyone among members of the dissertation committee who would like to speak? Do you have any other questions by email? Therefore, the discussion and the question and the accepting of questions are finished. Before we vote, I would like to answer this procedural question. Do you have any objections as to the procedure of the session, including with technology that has to do with remote mode of participation for some committee members? No questions? No. Thank you. Now we continue, and now I would like to put to the vote. It's 14:20 Moscow time. Questions for the members of the Dissertation Committee. We have a possibility to deliberate before open roll call voting. No. We don't need to switch off the broadcast and deliberate, so we'll continue and we vote. Every member of the Dissertation Committee should voice their opinion. Please, could you bring me the attendance list of the for this session? So, please check whether you can see us and hear us. Everything's fine. And now I put to the vote the resolution to award Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich the degree of a candidate of a Doctor of Sciences. A decision of the Dissertation Council is valid if not then 2/3 of the, not more than a half of the established membership of the Dissertation Council, but not fewer than four people vote for the decision. Kirill Vladimir Shevchenko, I will vote for awarding Doctor of Cultural Studies degree to Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich. Ivan Vladimirovich Kuzin, I vote in favor. Makovetsky Evgeny Anatolyevich, your opinion? I am in favor of awarding the degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies to Martysyuk. Markov Boris Vitalyevich, I vote to award the third academic degree to Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk. Viktor Viktorovich Muravyev, I vote for the awarding of the degree in Cultural Studies. I, Chairman of the committee, Alexei Viktorovich Smirnov, vote for the awarding of the third degree to Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich. Therefore, I would like to declare out of 6 participants, participating members of the academic committee, 6 voted for the resolution to award the third degree to Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich. Nobody voted against it, and no one abstained. Therefore, the decision to award Pavel Grigorievich Martysyuk an academic degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies in the academic field 24001, Theory and History of Culture, is taken. Concluded statement from the candidate. In my concluding statement, I would like to thank the chairman, esteemed members of the committee for such a substantial reading of my text, of identifying extra vectors of intellectual search that would lead to the truth. I would like to thank especially Evgeny Georgievich, my academic advisor, who restrained me sometimes in my overly zealous flying endeavors. I would like to wish all members of the Dissertation Committee good health and great successes On behalf of the academic committee, I would like to congratulate you on the successful defense, and I would like to ask the broadcast to be switched off. Thank you.